A single gunshot echoed through the canyon, startling Abigail Harmon as she stumbled backward in the darkness, her heartbeat racing like a wild stallion. The year was 1873, and the unforgiving landscape of Arizona Territory had never felt more dangerous than in this moment, with 3 men circling her like vultures. "You shouldn't have seen what you saw, Miss Harmon," growled Jeb Dawson, the local saloon owner whose hands were now stained with more than just whiskey. "Some secrets are meant to stay buried." Abigail's throat tightened. "I was just passing by. I won't tell anyone about the money, I swear." The moonlight caught the cruel smile that spread across Jeb's face. "Can't take that chance, madam. Not with what's at stake." She had only been in Copper Creek for 3 months, working as the new schoolteacher. At 24, Abigail had come west seeking independence after her parents' passing left her alone in Boston. Never had she imagined that an evening walk would lead to witnessing a secret meeting between the saloon owner and 2 men she recognized as stagecoach robbers whose faces were plastered on wanted posters. "Please," she begged, backing away until her heels met with nothing but air. Too late. She realized they had cornered her at the edge of an abandoned well. With a swift shove from Jeb's accomplice, Abigail plummeted backward, her scream cutting through the night air before ending in a painful thud at the bottom of the dry well. "Let that be the end of it," she heard one of the men say above. Their footsteps faded, leaving Abigail alone, her body aching, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. The well was about 20 feet deep, its stone walls crumbling with age. In the dim moonlight filtering from above, Abigail could see that she was miraculously unbroken, though bruised and scraped. Her light blue dress was torn at the hem, and her carefully pinned hair had come undone, cascading around her shoulders. "Help!" she cried, her voice bouncing off the stone walls. "Please, someone help me." But Copper Creek was a small town, and the well was on its outskirts, far from any homestead or business that might hear her pleas. Hours passed. The night grew colder, and Abigail huddled against the wall, her tears having dried into salty tracks on her cheeks. She thought of her students, wondering if they would miss her when she didn't arrive for class tomorrow. Would anyone even look for her? In this wild territory, people disappeared all the time. As dawn broke, bringing with it a sliver of pink light to her prison, Abigail heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. She stood up, ignoring the pain in her ankle, and called out again, her voice hoarse from a night of crying and shouting. "Hello, is anyone there? Please help me." The hoofbeats stopped. For a terrible moment, Abigail feared the rider had simply passed by, unaware of her plight. Then a shadow fell across the opening above. "Hello down there," called a deep, unfamiliar voice. "Are you hurt, madam?" Fresh tears, this time of relief, sprang to Abigail's eyes. "Yes, I'm trapped. Please help me." The face that appeared at the well's edge belonged to a man Abigail had never seen before. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shaded piercing blue eyes, and several days' worth of stubble darkened his jaw. "Hold on," he called down. "I'll get you out." The stranger disappeared for a few minutes, during which Abigail feared he might have left, but soon the end of a rope snaked down into the well, coiling at her feet. "Tie it around your waist," the man instructed. "Make it good and tight." "I'll pull you up." Abigail did as she was told, her trembling fingers working the rope into a secure knot. "Ready," she called up. "Hang on tight," the stranger replied. "This might be a bit rough." The rope tightened, and Abigail felt herself being lifted. She pressed her feet against the wall of the well to keep from scraping against the rough stone. Slowly, inch by inch, she ascended toward the light, toward freedom. When she reached the top, strong hands grabbed her arms and pulled her over the edge. Abigail collapsed onto the dry grass, breathing heavily, the morning sun warm on her face. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at her rescuer. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn denim, leather chaps, and a faded red shirt. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were kind. "What's your name, miss?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "Abigail Harmon. I'm the schoolteacher in Copper Creek." "Miss Harmon," he said with a nod. "I'm Kieran Hayes. Most folks call me Kit." He looked at the well, then back at her. "Wells don't generally climb into themselves. Want to tell me how you ended up down there?" Abigail hesitated. The memory of Jeb's threat was still fresh, but this stranger had just saved her life. "I was pushed," she admitted. "I saw something I shouldn't have." Kit's expression hardened. "Who pushed you?" "Jeb Dawson and two men I believe are the Sutton brothers. They've been robbing stagecoaches, and I saw them dividing the money." Kit nodded slowly. "The Suttons have been causing trouble all over the territory, been tracking them for weeks." "You're a lawman?" Abigail asked, noticing for the first time the star-shaped badge partially hidden by his leather vest. "U.S. Marshal," Kit confirmed. "Was on my way to Copper Creek to look into those robberies when I heard you calling." He stood and offered his hand. "Can you stand, Miss Harmon?" Abigail took his hand and tried to get to her feet, but her ankle gave way beneath her. Kit caught her before she could fall. "Looks like you won't be walking back to town," he said. "My horse can carry us both." Before Abigail could protest, Kit had lifted her in his arms and carried her to where a magnificent chestnut stallion waited patiently. With surprising gentleness, he set her on the saddle, then mounted behind her. "Thank you again," Abigail said softly as they set off toward town. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." "Just doing my job, madam," Kit replied, but there was a warmth in his voice that made Abigail feel safe for the first time since her ordeal began. The ride back to Copper Creek took nearly an hour, during which Abigail found herself increasingly aware of the strong arms that encircled her to hold the reins. Despite her exhaustion and fear, she couldn't help but notice the faint scent of leather and pine that clung to Kit Hayes. As they rode into town, heads turned. It wasn't every day that the schoolteacher arrived on horseback with a stranger, especially looking as disheveled as Abigail did now. Kit took her directly to Doc Wilson's office on Main Street. The elderly physician took one look at Abigail's condition and ushered her inside, clucking disapprovingly at her scrapes and bruises. "You stay put, Miss Harmon," Kit said as Doc began examining her ankle. "I'm going to have a word with Sheriff Tanner about our friends Dawson and the Suttons." "Be careful," Abigail warned. "Jeb has influence in this town." Kit touched the brim of his hat. "I've dealt with his kind before, don't you worry." After Kit left, Doc Wilson wrapped Abigail's sprained ankle and cleaned her cuts. "You're lucky, Miss Harmon," he said. "Could have been a lot worse, falling down a well like that." Abigail didn't correct his assumption. She was too tired to explain and too afraid of what might happen if word got back to Jeb before Kit could apprehend him. "You need rest," Doc continued. "I'd say stay off that ankle for at least a week." "But my students can wait," Doc interrupted firmly. "Your health comes first." Reluctantly, Abigail agreed. Doc Wilson sent word to Mrs. Peterson, who owned the boarding house where Abigail rented a room, and within the hour, Abigail was tucked into her bed, clean and bandaged. Though her mind was far from restful, she must have dozed off, for the next thing she knew, there was a knock at her door, and Mrs. Peterson entered, followed by Kit Hayes. "Marshal Hayes insisted on checking on you," Mrs. Peterson said with a hint of disapproval. It was highly improper for a single man to visit a woman in her bedroom, but given the circumstances, the older woman had made an exception. "I'll be right outside," Mrs. Peterson added pointedly before leaving them. Kit removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "How are you feeling, Miss Harmon?" "Better, thank you," Abigail replied, self-consciously tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Did you find them?" Kit's expression darkened. "Dawson was gone by the time I got to the saloon, left in a hurry, according to the bartender. No sign of the Suttons either." Abigail's heart sank. They could be anywhere by now. "I've sent telegrams to every lawman within 100 miles, Kit assured her. "They won't get far." He hesitated, then added, "But until they're caught, you could still be in danger." "What am I supposed to do?" Abigail asked, fear creeping back into her voice. "I can't just hide forever." Kit leaned forward, his blue eyes intent. "I've arranged for a deputy to keep watch on the boarding house, but it would be safer if you stayed somewhere less obvious." "Where would I go?" "I have a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town," Kit said. "It's not much, but it's secluded and no one would think to look for you there." Abigail stared at him. "You want me to stay at your home, alone with you?" A flush crept up Kit's neck. "It wouldn't be proper, I know, but my housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, lives there too. She's a respectable widow, and she'd act as chaperone. Your reputation would be safe." The idea was scandalous, but Abigail couldn't deny the logic. If Jeb Dawson or the Suttons returned to silence her permanently, the boarding house would be the first place they'd look. "All right," she agreed finally, "but only until they're caught." Kit nodded, relief evident in his features. "I'll make the arrangements. We'll leave at first light tomorrow." After Kit left, Abigail lay back against her pillows, wondering if she had made the right decision. She barely knew Marshal Hayes, yet she was preparing to stay in his home. But there was something about him that inspired trust. Perhaps it was the way he had lifted her from that well without hesitation, or the determination in his eyes when he promised to catch the men who had harmed her. Whatever it was, Abigail found herself looking forward to the morning with a mixture of trepidation and, oddly, anticipation. Dawn came early, as it always did in the desert. Kit arrived with a wagon, explaining that the ride would be gentler on Abigail's ankle than horseback. Mrs. Peterson helped her pack a small trunk with her belongings, all the while making it clear that she disapproved of the arrangement, reputation-saving housekeeper or not. "It's only temporary," Abigail assured her, "until Marshal Hayes catches the men who did this." The ride to Kit's ranch was surprisingly pleasant. The morning was cool, the desert landscape beautiful in the soft light. Kit pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the territory that made Abigail laugh despite her situation. "How long have you lived out here?" she asked as they passed a cluster of saguaro cacti. "About 5 years," Kit replied. "Bought the place after my first big case as a marshal, always wanted a piece of land to call my own. And before that," Kit's expression grew distant, "grew up in Texas. My pa was a rancher. Lost the place in a drought when I was 18. Drifted for a while, then joined up with the law." He glanced at her. "What about you? What brings a Boston lady out to Arizona territory?" Abigail smoothed her skirt. "My parents died last year. Influenza. I had no other family and teaching positions are scarce back east. When I saw the advertisement for Copper Creek, it seemed like an opportunity for a fresh start. And was it? Before all this trouble, I mean." Abigail considered the question. "Yes, I think it was. The children are wonderful, and there's a freedom here that I never had in Boston." Kit smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his rugged face and made Abigail's heart skip a beat. "The West has a way of growing on you," he said, "despite all its dangers." They crested a small hill and Kit's ranch came into view. It was modest but well-maintained. A one-story house built of adobe and wood, a barn, corral, and a few outbuildings. A vegetable garden thrived near the house and chickens pecked in a fenced yard. "It's lovely," Abigail said sincerely. Kit looked pleased. It's not much compared to what you're probably used to, but it's home. Mrs. Finch proved to be a plump, cheerful woman in her 60s who welcomed Abigail as if she were an expected guest, rather than a woman in hiding. She showed Abigail to a small but comfortable bedroom, explaining that it had belonged to Kit's sister when she visited from Tucson. "The Marshal's a good man," Mrs. Finch confided as she helped Abigail unpack. "Too married to his work for his own good, if you ask me, but a good man all the same." Over the next few days, Abigail settled into life at the ranch. With her ankle still healing, she couldn't do much, but she insisted on helping Mrs. Finch with the cooking and mending. Kit rode into town each day, returning with news of the search for Dawson and the Suttons, which so far had yielded no results. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Kit would tell her about his cases, and Abigail would share stories about her students. Sometimes they would simply sit in comfortable silence, and Abigail found herself cherishing these quiet moments more than she could have imagined. A week into her stay, Abigail was in the kitchen, helping Mrs. Finch prepare dinner when they heard the sound of a horse approaching at speed. Kit burst through the door moments later, his expression grim. "They've been spotted," he announced. "About 30 miles north. I'm riding out with a posse at first light." Abigail felt a cold knot of fear form in her stomach. "You're going after them." "It's my job, Abigail," Kit said, using her first name for the first time. "And they need to be brought to justice for what they did to you." That night, Abigail couldn't sleep. The thought of Kit riding into danger haunted her. When had he become so important to her? Was it possible to develop such feelings in so short a time? Unable to remain in bed, she limped to the kitchen for a glass of water. To her surprise, Kit was there, sitting at the table, cleaning his revolver by lamplight. He looked up when she entered. "You should be resting that ankle," he said, but his tone was gentle. "I couldn't sleep," Abigail admitted, taking a seat across from him. "I'm worried about tomorrow." Kit set down his gun. "I've been chasing outlaws for years, Abigail. I know what I'm doing." "I know that," she said softly. "But these men, they're dangerous. They tried to kill me without hesitation." "Which is why they need to be stopped," Kit replied. He reached across the table and took her hand. "I promise you, I'll be careful." The touch of his calloused fingers against hers sent a warmth spreading through Abigail's body. "When I first came west," she said, "I thought I was seeking independence. But I've realized that there's a difference between being independent and being alone." Kit's blue eyes held hers. "And which are you now?" "I thought I was alone," Abigail whispered, "until you lowered that rope." For a long moment they sat in silence, hands joined across the table. Then Kit stood, gently pulling Abigail to her feet. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "These past days, having you here, it's made me realize what's been missing in my life." Abigail's heart pounded. "What's that?" "Someone to come home to," Kit said simply. "Someone who makes this place feel like more than just a house." Before Abigail could respond, Kit leaned down and kissed her, a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened when she responded. His arms encircled her, strong and secure, and Abigail felt as if she had finally found her place in this vast, wild territory. When they broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "I shouldn't have done that," Kit said, though he made no move to release her. "Not with you in my protection." "It's not right." "It feels right to me," Abigail replied, surprising herself with her boldness. "More right than anything has in a long time." Kit pressed his forehead against hers. "When this is over, when you're safe, we can see where this leads, but for now—" He stepped back reluctantly. "For now, I need to focus on catching these men." Abigail nodded, understanding but disappointed. "Promise me you'll come back." Wild horses couldn't keep me away, Kit vowed. Dawn found Abigail on the porch, watching as Kit mounted his horse. He wore his badge prominently now, and a Winchester rifle was secured to his saddle. "I'll be back as soon as I can," he told her. "Stay close to the house. Mrs. Finch has my spare revolver if there's trouble." Abigail nodded, trying to be brave. "Godspeed, Marshal Hayes." Kit touched the brim of his hat, then turned his horse and rode away, leaving Abigail to watch until he disappeared into the morning mist. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Abigail tried to keep busy, helping Mrs. Finch with household chores despite the older woman's protests about her ankle. By afternoon, she had taken to pacing the porch, scanning the horizon for any sign of riders. "You're wearing a path in my boards," Mrs. Finch observed as she brought out a pitcher of lemonade. "The marshal knows what he's doing. He'll be back." "I know," Abigail said, accepting a glass. "I just can't help worrying." Mrs. Finch patted her arm. "That's what happens when you care for someone. The worrying never stops." Abigail looked at her in surprise. "Is it that obvious?" The housekeeper smiled. "To everyone but the two of you, it seems." As evening approached, Abigail's anxiety grew. Surely if everything had gone well, Kit would have returned by now, or at least sent word she was helping Mrs. Finch prepare supper when they heard horses approaching more than one, by the sound of it. Abigail rushed to the window, hope rising in her chest, only to have it turn to ice when she saw 3 riders, none of them Kit. "It's them," she whispered, recognizing Jeb Dawson's stocky figure in the lead. "The men who pushed me into the well." Mrs. Finch moved with surprising speed for her age, retrieving Kit's spare revolver from a drawer. "Take this and go to the back bedroom," she instructed. "Bar the door and don't come out no matter what you hear." "I can't leave you to face them alone," Abigail protested. "I'm not asking," Mrs. Finch said firmly. "The marshal would never forgive me if something happened to you. Now go." Reluctantly, Abigail took the gun and hurried to the bedroom, closing and barring the door behind her. Through the window, she could see the 3 men dismounting in the yard. "Hello, the house," Jeb Dawson called. "We're looking for Miss Harmon. We know she's here." Abigail heard the front door open and Mrs. Finch's voice, steely with determination. "There's no one here by that name." "You gentlemen best be on your way." One of the Sutton brothers laughed. "We ain't gentlemen, madam, and we know you're lying. The schoolteacher's here, and we aim to finish what we started." Abigail's hands shook as she checked the revolver, finding it fully loaded. She had never fired a gun before, but her father had believed in self-reliance and had shown her the basics. Would she be able to pull the trigger if it came to it? The sound of breaking glass and Mrs. Finch's cry of alarm decided her. Abigail couldn't hide while the kind woman who had taken her in was in danger. Gripping the revolver, she unbarred the door and made her way down the hallway. The scene in the main room froze her blood. Mrs. Finch was backed against the wall, a cut on her forehead bleeding freely. Jeb Dawson and the Sutton brothers were ransacking the house, overturning furniture and breaking anything in their path. "Where is she?" Jeb demanded, grabbing Mrs. Finch by the arms. "Tell us, or things will get a lot worse for you." "Let her go," Abigail called, stepping into the room with the revolver raised. Her hands were trembling, but she forced herself to sound confident. "It's me you want." Jeb released Mrs. Finch, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well, well, the little schoolteacher has some spine after all." "Get out," Abigail ordered, "all of you, before I put a bullet in you." The younger Sutton brother snickered. "You ain't never shot a man in your life, lady. Probably couldn't hit the broad side of a barn." "Maybe not," Abigail conceded, "but I'm angry enough to try." Jeb took a step toward her. "Put the gun down, Miss Harmon. We just want to talk." "The way we talked before you pushed me into that well," Abigail retorted. "I don't think so." Jeb's face darkened. That was unfortunate, but you left us no choice. You saw something you shouldn't have. And now the law knows about it too, Abigail said. Marshal Hayes has been tracking you for days. He knows everything. Which is why we need to leave these parts, the older Sutton brother said, and why you can't be left to testify against us. Abigail's finger tightened on the trigger. I won't let you hurt me or Mrs. Finch. Jeb took another step forward. You don't have the guts to shoot, schoolteacher. Before Abigail could respond, the front door burst open. Kit Hayes stood in the doorway, his revolver drawn, blood streaming from a cut on his temple. I wouldn't test her if I were you, Dawson, he said. Miss Harmon is full of surprises. Relief flooded through Abigail at the sight of him, but she kept her gun steady, knowing the danger wasn't over. Jeb and the Suttons whirled around, reaching for their weapons. Kit fired first, his bullet striking the younger Sutton in the shoulder, sending him crashing into a table. The older Sutton got a shot off, but it went wide, splintering the doorframe beside Kit's head. In the chaos, Jeb lunged for Abigail, trying to use her as a shield. Without thinking, she pulled the trigger. The revolver's kick nearly knocked her off her feet, but her bullet found its mark, grazing Jeb's side and causing him to stumble back with a howl of pain. Kit was on him in an instant, wrestling him to the ground and disarming him. The older Sutton, seeing his brother down and Dawson captured, threw his hands up in surrender. Smart move, Kit said grimly, keeping his gun trained on the outlaw while he handcuffed Dawson. Abigail, are you and Mrs. Finch all right? Abigail nodded, the revolver now hanging limply at her side. We're fine, but you're hurt. Kit touched the cut on his head. It's nothing. Had a bit of trouble with these gentlemen earlier. Caught up to them about 10 miles out, but they got the drop on me. Managed to escape and follow them here. Within an hour, Sheriff Tanner and his deputies had arrived, alerted by a neighbor who had heard the gunshots. The Sutton brothers and Jeb Dawson were taken into custody, their wounds treated by Doc Wilson, who had come along with the posse. They'll be facing charges for the stagecoach robberies, assault on a federal marshal, and attempted murder, Sheriff Tanner told Abigail as the prisoners were loaded into a wagon. They won't be seeing daylight for a long, long time. After everyone had left, Kit found Abigail sitting on the porch steps, watching the last light fade from the sky. He sat beside her, wincing slightly as he lowered himself down. Doc says you should have those ribs wrapped, Abigail said, noticing his discomfort. I've had worse, Kit replied with a small smile. Besides, I couldn't wait to talk to you. Abigail looked at him, taking in the bandage on his temple, the tired lines around his eyes. You came back for me. I promised I would, Kit said simply. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. When I saw Dawson and the Suttons heading this way, I've never been so scared in my life. Not for myself, but for you. I was scared too, Abigail admitted. But then I remembered what you said about the West making you stronger. Kit's blue eyes were serious as they met hers. Abigail, these past weeks have changed everything for me. Before you came into my life, I was just going through the motions doing my job, coming home to an empty house, then doing it all over again. And now, Abigail asked softly. Now I know what I want, Kit said. A real home, a family, a future. He hesitated, then added, with you if you'll have me. Abigail's heart soared. Are you asking what I think you're asking, Marshal Hayes? Kit laughed, a warm, rich sound that made Abigail want to hear it every day for the rest of her life. I suppose I am, Miss Harmon, though it's not very romantic, sitting here on my broken porch with the both of us looking like we've been through a war. I don't need romance, Abigail said, squeezing his hand. I just need you. Kit leaned forward and kissed her, a kiss full of promise and hope. Then you have me, he whispered against her lips. "For as long as you want me." "That might be a very long time," Abigail warned, her eyes sparkling with happiness. "I'm counting on it," Kit replied. 3 months later, Abigail stood before the mirror in Mrs. Peterson's best guest room, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. Her dark hair was adorned with white flowers, and her wedding dress, though simple, was the most beautiful garment she had ever owned. "You look radiant," Mrs. Finch said, adjusting the veil. "The Marshal won't know what hit him." Abigail smiled, thinking of Kit waiting for her at the small church in Copper Creek. After the ordeal with Dawson and the Suttons, she had returned to teaching, but she had also spent every available moment at Kit's ranch, helping to repair the damage from the fight and making plans for their future together. The town had been scandalized at first by the speed of their courtship, but as the story of Abigail's rescue from the well and the subsequent capture of the notorious outlaws spread, public opinion had shifted. Now, it seemed everyone in Copper Creek had turned out for the wedding of their schoolteacher to the handsome U.S. Marshal. "It's time," Mrs. Peterson announced, entering the room. "Everyone's waiting." As Abigail walked down the aisle toward Kit, who stood tall and proud in his best suit, she thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. A terrible act of violence had led to the greatest happiness she had ever known. Kit's eyes never left hers as she approached, his expression one of wonder and love. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, squeezing them gently. "You saved my life," Abigail whispered, too low for anyone but Kit to hear. "And you saved mine," he replied, "in all the ways that matter." As they spoke their vows before the assembled townspeople, Abigail knew that the journey that had brought her west had finally led her home, not to a place, but to a person. In Kit's arms, she had found the freedom and belonging she had always sought. And as they sealed their promise with a kiss, cheers erupting around them, Abigail silently thanked the twist of fate that had led Kit Hayes to lower a rope into that dry well and lift her not just to safety, but to love. 5 years later, Abigail sat on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching as Kit taught their 4-year-old son, Thomas, how to ride his new pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, played at Abigail's feet, babbling happily to her rag doll. The years had been good to them. Kit had eventually hung up his badge, focusing instead on building their ranch into one of the most prosperous in the territory. Abigail still taught at the school in Copper Creek, though now she rode there with Kit 3 days a week, leaving the children with Mrs. Finch, who had become like a grandmother to them. "Mama, look," Thomas called as he successfully guided his pony in a small circle. "I'm a cowboy like Papa." "Well done, sweetheart," Abigail called back, her heart swelling with pride. Kit looked over at her, his smile as warm and loving as it had been on their wedding day. In that moment, with the setting sun painting the desert gold and her family before her, Abigail knew that the darkest moment of her life, that terrifying night in the well, had ultimately led her to the greatest light. As if reading her thoughts, Kit lifted Thomas from the pony and set him on the ground. "Go show your sister the new kitten in the barn," he suggested. "But be gentle, remember." As the children scampered off, Kit climbed the porch steps and sat beside Abigail, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Abigail leaned into his embrace, savoring the strength and tenderness that had become her sanctuary. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she replied truthfully. And as the first stars appeared in the vast Arizona sky, Abigail Hayes knew that some falls, painful as they might be, lead not to endings but to the most beautiful beginnings.